Okay, so we're recording now, and I'm about to let people in. Okay, guys, going live.
All right.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to NYMER's presentation of reasonable suspicion training for supervisors. I'm Dave Bloodgood, Risk Control Manager. We're going to give folks just another minute to sort of come on board. Everybody's coming in. I don't know if the numbers climbing means that I doubt everybody's filing through a door single file, but I'll just give you another few seconds here. Okay, the numbers have stopped climbing with any great rapidity, so we're going to get going. As I said, I'm Dave Bloodgood, and with us today are our presenter, Roger Kuva, Senior Risk Control Specialist for NYMER, and Steve Curlin, also Senior Risk Control Specialist for NYMER. And we are presenting on reasonable suspicion training for supervisors. We'll just let you know that if you had registered on the Zoom link, so you accessed a link on your computer and that's how you're watching it today, you will get a certificate from NYMER for having completed this course as long as you stay through the whole thing. If in fact you're sharing your screen with a bunch of people, have a sign-in sheet, and that will be the documentation that you need to show that everybody that was present took this training. Those folks will not get a certificate because we don't see them in the background, okay? So with that, we're gonna just launch right into this. There's a lot of good information here. We don't want to keep you past where it's necessary. So Roger, if you would please take it away. If you folks have, by the way, if you folks have questions, there is a chat feature and a question and answer. Please type your questions in there. We'll try to answer them as we go along. If in fact the material will be covered during the course of the presentation, and we recognize that, we may not answer the question at that time, okay? So thank you, Roger. Go right ahead.
All right. Thank you, Dave, for the introduction. Steve, good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to attend this presentation today virtually. Again, this is reasonable suspicion training for supervisors, and we'll be hopefully keeping this to around 45 minutes, depending on questions, and try to make this as time happy for you as possible. Next one. Now we're ready to begin. Can everyone see the next slide?
I'm advancing it. Yeah, it should be up on yours, Roger. Okay,
overview of training. So here's what we're going to cover today. Policy dissemination, the policy on this reasonable suspicion training, the federal motor carrier safety discussion, understand what reasonable suspicion means, and the quotation marks about reasonable suspicion is very important as we go through this presentation. How it differs from other forms of testing. We're going to cover what the warning signs of both alcohol and drug abuse are, how to approach the driver or employee suspected of drug or alcohol use on the job, how to document any observed behavior, which is very important, and we'll cover that repeatedly throughout this presentation this morning, and what drugs are tested and what are the corresponding signs and symptoms. Next slide.
I advanced it.
Okay, I'm not seeing that. So your organization, your municipality should be putting out or should have already an existing policy distributed to every employee, as well as any new hires that come on board about what this policy means. These employees should be requested to sign and acknowledge that they've received the policy and it's been covered with them on a receipt form. and of course should be placed in their personnel file. Now, the FMCSA Clearinghouse, everyone's heard about, requires regulated employees, employers, medical review officers, substance abuse professionals you may use to do your drug testing program, and any other consortia of third-party administrators that may be used, and other service agents to report to the clearinghouse information any violations of the drug and alcohol regulations and Code 49 of Federal Regulations, Parts 40 and 382 by current and prospective employees. So that's a lot of regulatory language there, but that's what this clearinghouse now is doing. All municipal entities must be registered in the federal database as of January 6th of last year. And employers must question the clearinghouse for current and prospective employees' drug and alcohol violations before permitting those employees to operate a commercial motor vehicle on public roads. And existing employees must also be questioned annually. All drivers, regardless of restriction, must also be registered with the clearinghouse. All CDL drivers must consent to drug testing. All CDL drivers must consent to having test results posted to the clearinghouse. Primary reasons you should go to the clearinghouse: record information about any violation of FMCSA's drug and alcohol testing program by a CDL driver, question the clearinghouse for drug and alcohol program violation information, and consent to an employer's request to view your clearinghouse record or review your own driver record, which should be done anyway. Now, this slide goes over what the reporting entity is and what information will be reported to the clearinghouse. The current employer of a CDL driver or the designated TPA, whoever's involved here, must provide with an alcohol confirmation test with a concentration of 0.04 or higher, or any refusal to test as specified in the regulation. So refusal to test, and we'll cover this later, refusal to test by a driver is the same as it would be considered a positive test. As it says in that second frame there, refusal to test, not requiring a determination by the MRO as specified in the regulation. Any actual knowledge that a driver has used alcohol on duty or used alcohol within a 4-hour period of coming on duty, or used alcohol prior to post-accident testing, or has a controlled substance. Any negative return to duty test results, and completion of follow-up testing. The MRO,
Roger.
Yes.
Roger, we have a question and I'm unable to.
You're muted,
you read
Dave.
it? Can you read it?
It just says, what does FMCSA stand for?
Federal Motor Carrier Safety
Thank you.
Agency. Sorry. Yes, FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Agency, which is basically the federal oversight on the CDL law here. The MRO, going back to the medical review officer, this is the person that actually reviews the results and verifies everything. This MRO's duties for the clearinghouse has to include a verified positive or any test that may have been altered or somehow compromised within 2 business days of making a determination of any DOT-approved drug test. So this is what the MRO has to do for the employer. Any refusal to test requiring a determination by the MRO as specified in 49 CFR within 2 business days of making a determination or verification of an approved drug test. And any changes of verified drug test as per 49 CFR within 1 business day of making any change to the reported results. So whatever goes on with this MRO, if they have any changes in the results during these timeframes, they have to communicate that to the clearinghouse. Now, each municipality must confirm with your drug testing entity or consortium who is responsible for reporting the results to the clearinghouse. So you as a municipality, your administrator needs to make sure this is done with the clearinghouse as far as the confirmation of who the reporting entity is. Just a lot of regulatory lingo here going forward. Now, as far as the driver's responsibility, they must register with your current or prospective employer, give consent for them to query the record, and go to the clearinghouse and give permission for potential new employers to question the clearinghouse. That's what the driver is required to do. Before we go any further, again, there's as you may know, there's a number of tests, drug and alcohol tests that are given. You have pre-employment or post-offer employment drug and alcohol screening. You've got everybody's familiar with the random testing. Everybody's part of a random poll. Your name comes up, you go for a test. Post-accident, if an accident of a certain nature is or a certain level occurs, then you have to go for a post-accident test. And if you've already been involved in being caught in a positive test and you are returning to work, there's called the RTD or return to duty test that may be done periodically over a period of time. Those are pretty, they're pretty set in stone tests. They're concrete. But the reasonable suspicion testing is the most difficult of the five because it requires a judgment on the part of you as a supervisor and a boss, basically, observing your employee when they come to work or on the job for any sign of any inebriation or any sign of being under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And it's sometimes not an easy call to make. And that's why this training is so important as we go forward today, because it's a huge responsibility you have to make, and it's a call you have to make depending on either the behavior characteristics of the person or their physical condition. But things like that you have to take into account. And so as we go forward here, that's what we're going to focus on. My colleagues on this call, going further here, we're safety and loss control professionals. We're not attorneys, we're not legal professionals. Our job first and foremost is to help our members, you folks on this call today, to avoid anything that might result in injury to employees. Yes.
Roger, I'm sorry, you're a bit muffled.
Okay.
I think maybe, if you lean back a little bit, tends to clear. I think there's an echo bouncing off your laptop there.
Okay, I guess I'm a little close to the mic here then. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Better? Okay. Again, our responsibility as your safety and loss control professional is to help you avoid anything that might result in an injury to an employee, obviously, to your staff or members of the public as you conduct your operations during the day. And that is our first and foremost responsibility to, and again, by definition, avoid a claim that might occur to your municipality. The regulatory aspects of this are just that, but our first and foremost goal here is safety of life and limb and preventing claims. And we're hoping we can help you do that with this presentation. Now, an employer must require a driver to submit to an alcohol test or controlled substance test when the employer has reasonable suspicion to believe the driver has violated the prohibitions concerning alcohol and or controlled substances. Testing must be based, very importantly, on specific observations concerning any of the following. The employee's appearance, their behavior characteristics or mannerisms, their speech, and any body odors that the person may emanate, and a combination of these factors. You as a supervisor making the call must be properly trained in reasonable suspicion. Now, training is only required once during your tenure of employment, but as noted here, we highly recommend refresher training periodically on this topic, given how important it is, and the fact that you have to make a call and you want to be as well trained as possible in identifying someone who is under the influence prior to them going to work that morning. Now, the driver can only be directed to undergo reasonable suspicion testing for alcohol this is for alcohol now, and for drugs, it'll be different. For alcohol, it's during, just before, or just after performing a safety sensitive function. Now let's talk about safety sensitive for a minute here. As a CDL, it's not just driving that is defined as safety sensitive. It could be any task that person's undergoing on that particular day, whether they're feeding a chipper, doing chainsaw work, operating heavy equipment, or anything defined as safety sensitive in your job categories. And that's very important to keep in mind. But for alcohol, you got to catch the person either during their duties, if you happen to observe them, or just before they show up or when they get to work in the morning, or just after performing a safety sensitive function and something doesn't look right. Now the requirements, and again, we're getting into the regulatory requirements here. If a reasonable suspicion test for alcohol is not administered within 2 hours of the observation, you have to document stating the reason why the test was not given. So you have to write that down. And after 8 hours have passed, a written document must be prepared stating the reason why it was not given promptly. And all attempts at that point to give the test should be stopped. Now, alcohol runs out of your system fairly quickly compared to drugs. So after 8 hours, there's no point to doing that anyway. So there's the reason for the time frames here. But the important thing is you have to be able to document why these tests, or why this test wasn't administered when it was, first identified that the person may be under the influence. Requirements continued here. No driver shall report for duty or continue to perform safety sensitive functions while under the influence or impaired by alcohol. David, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. The employer, again, must not permit a driver to perform or continue to perform safety sensitive functions until alcohol test is administered and the driver's alcohol concentration is less than 0.02, or 24 hours have elapsed following determination that there's reasonable suspicion to believe the driver has violated the prohibitions on alcohol. So basically, this employee is not going back to work until they can demonstrate they're under 0.02. A reasonable suspicion test for controlled substances now, and now we're talking drugs. Now, this is not alcohol, may be administered based on observations made at any time the driver is on duty. So it could be an observed activity. The supervisor happens to note the person doing their assigned tasks that day. Maybe it is operating a chainsaw, maybe it is operating heavy equipment, or doing tree work, or whatever the assignment is that day, and the supervisor observes something that doesn't look right with that person. Well, they can make a requirement to take a test at that time. And again, documentation here. Written record must be made of the observations leading to a controlled substances reasonable suspicion test within 24 hours of the observed behavior, or before the results of the controlled test are released, whichever comes earlier. So, the crux of this whole test for supervisors and you as bosses is observe and be able to document what you observe, confirm what you've observed. Again, you got to be able to write this down somewhere or put it down for longevity here. And confront's not a word I would use, but you have to make arrangements to sit down with that person and discuss what you see and why you have to do what you have to do. And that may result in going down for a test. So observe, confirm your observations, document them, and then prepare to address the employee with what you see. And this is all requirement for this kind of testing. There's a number of ways you might want to approach a person, driver, and under these conditions. Again, be factual. Stick to the facts, what you actually observe, based on things we'll go over later in this presentation. Drug use is illegal, end of story. And legality aside, you're talking, again, we're focused on safety first here. This driver, for whatever reason, does not look right that day. And they look like they're not 100%. And if they're not 100%, the reaction time is slower. And that right there is dangerous. And that's what you want to stick to is the facts as far as their condition and their condition to work safely in that safety sensitive job. You want to show concern. You want to approach this. This is where all your people skills are going to have to come into play as a boss and how you handle this person. It's very important. Try to be respectful of the person's when you do discuss with them things that you've seen and why you have to do what you have to do. some things that might help you if you're not comfortable with this. Approach the driver in a private setting, of course. It's not something you want to do in front of a bunch of other employees or people, obviously. It's a pretty tense subject, so you want to be you want to be confined to a private area. You want to make any scene, obviously, and you're going to tell the person this is a confidential conversation. You're not blame placing here. It's not about that. You're not, berating the driver. You're not blaming the driver for anything, but you got to follow the regulations, and again, you got to focus on safety. Non-threatening questions, non-confrontational questions. State what you saw. You seem like you seem a little slow today. Your eyes seem a little off. Your gait may have changed. You're not walking, right. There's something not right with you. Is there anything you'd like to say? Oops, I just lost it. Hold on here. Okay, sorry, had a little hiccup there. Other helpful things that help you with this discussion with this employee is maintain your composure at all times. You've got to be unemotional about this, almost. Keep your voice down. Again, you want to display concern for the driver about the driver's condition, how they look, maybe even how they smell. Again, these are things we'll go over in as far as observable characteristics that you have observed, you have seen, and have given you cause for concern. Try to ignore any inflammatory remarks or anything that's going to inflame the situation. The driver may react in certain ways, which we'll talk about, and you have to be, depending on how they react to you, you're going to have to be very cool about your presentation and what your composure is and what your mannerisms are. Instead of test, we suggest using the word evaluation. Using the word test sometimes puts people off. You're telling the driver you're going to need to evaluate their condition, basically.
Roger, we have one question asking if a driver can request a second test if he feels the results of the first test are wrong.
That's not something I can answer. There's an appeal process in the law, and they can go through that.
Yeah.
And that's beyond the scope of this session.
Yeah,
yes, they can.
Yeah. It's very likely, let's say the test may come back negative. Let's say it comes back negative, and then it is what it is. But at least, again, and I can't stress this enough to everybody here, this is reasonable suspicion. This is what you as a supervisor with some training here on observable characteristics, you're being asked to be reasonable here. You're not, beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay, you're not doing the test. You're not even making a diagnosis. You're not a doctor. What this is you reasonably suspect this driver is under the influence of something, and they are not 100%, and they could be a danger to themselves driving that truck, or a danger to the public, and that's got to be your first and foremost concern. And if there's anything, and your people, you see them every morning, depending on your experience or the level of experience you have, and what their normal characteristics are, you may be able to tell very quickly if someone's not 100%. And that's all you need here. As long as you can document what you're seeing clearly, and you may send that person down for a test, and maybe it is negative, or maybe if it's positive, then you caught something, and before you sent that person out. But if you're thinking safety first, that's the most important thing.
Good point.
Now, again, this is the most difficult part of this. Depending on your experience as a boss, or how many years you've been a supervisor, and how long you've known your people, a lot of things go into this. But you might have a various number of different types of reactions by the driver when you approach them and sit down and talk with them. They may be very defensive or denies your comments. And this is something you can do right there on this presentation today, is write down something you might say to the driver in this situation. And what if they just flat deny what you're seeing? Another response by the driver might be they're talking nonstop. You can hardly get word in edgewise. So right there is an indicator of some potential drug use when the person is very overly talkative. You might get this, driver becomes emotional and who knows what's going on. Maybe it's something that is going on in their personal life. Could be any number of reasons, death in the family, an illness, divorce situation going up, any number of situations, a financial crisis, it could be any number of situations why this particular person, maybe even a great employee, and they're having a real tough time. So you might get this kind of a reaction. How would you handle that? Now, the person doesn't say anything. They're not going to respond to you at all. And just sit there, and then you have to tell them what you've seen and basically why they have to be taken down for a test. You might get something like this, though. You might get a very aggressive or belligerent reaction from the driver, and then even threatening response. And then this is why, and if you may anticipate something like this from the person. And in that case, besides deciding how you would deal with it, it might not be a bad idea to have someone else in the room. It could be your boss or another party. That can be, if you expect an aggressive or even a threatening response, you're getting into a workplace violence situation there and under something like that. So be prepared for something like this. How would you handle it? You're just generally uncooperative. They're not going to give you anything, and they refuse to talk about it, and they're going to refuse, maybe possibly even to take the test. Which, and as we'll cover here later, we'll cover that particular situation. The very critical part of this, I should say, is documenting what you observe as their behavior. And we'll go through these characteristics physically and behaviorally you might see to write down. But a reasonable suspicion record, it could be behavior incident form. It might be in your policy. You might already have a form that you're familiar with. Basically, it's something you just write down and that you can actually look at, and it documents what you see. Their eyes were glassy. The pupils were dilated or pinpoints. The driver had a particular odor. Their gait was off when they're walking or when they're picking up equipment. They seem slow. But you got to be specific about what you see. And we'll go over more of these a little bit later in the presentation. So when you write it down, be very, very specific, clear, in your written description of what you see with that driver or that person. Now, again, going back to what I said before, you're not a doctor. You're not asked to diagnose the driver's condition. You are doing what you consider reasonable, and I stress reasonable. What are your reasonable observations of that person? And if something's not right about that person, physically or behaviorally, or they're overly aggressive and they're normally not aggressive, anything like that you can write down. And your duty ultimately is to determine if the driver appears to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and stop them from performing a safety-sensitive function. If you're unsure of whether to test for alcohol or drugs in these cases, then you can order both tests. And again, a driver refuses is considered the same thing as a positive test. So the refusal occurs when the driver fails to provide enough breath or saliva for an alcohol test or a urine test for drugs without a valid medical reason after being notified of the testing requirement. Or the driver clearly obstructs the testing process, or they simply won't take it. So a refusal is considered a positive. What happens after testing? Just like the driver does fail a drug or alcohol test, she must be removed from all safety-sensitive functions. And again, safety-sensitive jobs, not just driving, it could be any safety-sensitive action that they're undertaking. The driver may not return to a safety-sensitive function until an evaluation by a substance abuse professional or wherever your drug testing agency is and has complied with the treatment prescribed and has to pass a return to duty test. And the driver can be subject to a minimum of 6 follow-up tests in the first 12 months after return to duty, and may be subject to follow-up testing for up to 5 years, depending on the severity of the situation. And that driver or operator may not return to safety-sensitive duties for at least 24 hours if alcohol concentration is determined to be 0.02 or greater, but less than 0.04. So basically, they got to get under that 0.02 threshold. Now, additional consequences, disciplinary action should be handled according to your policy. That's not something we get involved in. That's up to your municipal policy, your collective bargaining agreements, whatever's set up with your particular town, village, county, or city. Again, before a driver can return to a safety-sensitive function, it must have alcohol test of less than 0.02 and a verified negative drug test. Has complied with any prescribed treatment if they have been tested positive before under the return to duty requirements. Completes a minimum of 6 follow-up tests within the first year back into a safety-sensitive job. And the substance abuse professional can direct follow-up testing for longer than that, up to 5 years after return to work. Back to you as a supervisor. You're the key person here. Again, this is a very challenging type of drug testing, as I pointed out before. We're trying to give you some tools to work with here with this presentation today, but again, the training should be done periodically, in our view, to reinforce your skills with doing this. Because you can't do the job without the right tools, obviously. Some tips and facts about alcohol and drugs that will help you understand warning signs and symptoms and the effects of substance abuse. So we'll go through this in the next few slides. Warning signs, substance abuse. Excessive absences, they're gone a lot, calling sick a lot of tardiness. They're never really on time for anything. Frequent requests for time off. They tend to get hurt more often. It could be a workers' comp issue, but they tend to get hurt a lot more than average employees, and without any apparent explanation as to why they were injured. They're generally not good work performers, and you notice this consistently. They're getting non-work related visits from other employees or strangers coming to your shop or coming to the work site. Very secretive behavior is demonstrated. They're always defensive, despite the slightest criticism. You might say things about their job or how they're performing their task. They get very, very defensive, awfully defensive about it. Their physical appearance may be changing drastically. Dropped a lot of weight. They're gaunt. They just don't look good. Their mood swings may become more pronounced. Someone who's normally gregarious and outgoing, all of a sudden their mood changes. They're more withdrawn. Their attitude's changing. They're more combative in their reaction to things. And their personal grooming and hygiene takes a turn south. They're not looking good at all compared to what they used to. So a lot of physical things you might be able to notice that are taking place, along with some behavior changes that may be negative or alarming. Now, the effects of alcohol and drugs in the body, and we've all experienced these. The thing about alcohol and drugs is that they make you feel good temporarily, as we all know, or at least as far as other things you may have had in the past. It gives you a false sense of fulfillment. You feel good. You feel like you can still do things like you did before. But in reality, while it makes you feel good, your reaction time is slowed. And it's that reaction time slowness. It's that you're just off a beat. You're not able to perform your functions as quickly or as competently as you did in the past. You may think like you can do it, but you really can't. Your reaction time is affected. It dulls your mental processes. Your coordination may be lacking, even though you don't think it's going to be lacking. There could be a specific odor, of course, on alcohol on your breath, and that's a good telltale sign, obviously. But your pupils become constricted. You may appear sleepy or a little off or slow in your gait. Your reactions are slow, and your speech may be affected depending on how much you've had. But these are specific things that you as a supervisor, if you see this, these are exactly the type of things you can write down. And you've seen this if you've taken defensive driving classes in the past. We've all seen this from time to time over the years. A 12-ounce can of beer or a 5-ounce glass of wine and a 1.5 shots of the hard liquor all contain the same amount of alcohol. Each 1.5 ounces of alcohol takes the average body about 1 hour to process and eliminate. And that's on average, and that's a lot depends on your body weight and other factors, but that's a good average, the old 1 drink an hour thing. Now that's alcohol. You start getting into things like marijuana. And we know there's grass, pot, weed. It has an active chemical in it that's called THC. Now, some signs and symptoms of use for your own as a supervisor to note. You may note that the person has more of a lackadaisical or I don't care attitude. They might develop a cough, a chronic sore throat. Obviously, it's very odorous. You can smell it. Distinctive pungent odor on the clothing or even in the room. Chronic fatigue and lack of motivation. Their speech is slower. Their eyes are red. Again, these are physical things and, possibly even behavioral things that you can note when you write down why you think this person's under the influence and document why they should go for a test. Unlike alcohol, marijuana stays in your body for up to 28 days. The THC in marijuana is far more potent today than it was, back, 3 or 4 decades ago. Combining marijuana with alcohol or other depressant drugs can produce a multiplied effect, increasing the impairment, substantially. Now, they could be doing marijuana and then they do coke, something like that. Speaking of coke, cocaine is a stimulant drug, also known as coke or blow, and it is inhaled, snorted, ingested, or injected. Free-base cocaine, known as crack or rock, is smoked.
You're getting.
Hello? Question?
You're getting a little tough to understand again. I'm not quite sure why, but okay.
I'm leaning back from the laptop. Can you hear me now? Better?
Yes, that's better.
All right. Again, cocaine is a stimulant drug, also known as coke or blow, when it is inhaled, snorted, ingested, or injected. Free-base cocaine, known as crack or rock, is smoked. Signs and symptoms of use: cocaine, fatigue, anxiety, agitation, a chronically runny or irritated nose, dilated pupils, and visual impairment. Difficulty in concentrating on anything, and physiological responses: high blood pressure, maybe heart palpitations, and irregular heart rhythm. More serious physical problems. Lack of sleep or insomnia, and profuse sweating and dry mouth. Again, these are all physical symptoms you might be able to observe with a person when they get on the job. Other facts about cocaine: treatment success rates are lower for cocaine than for other chemical dependencies. Cocaine causes the strongest mental dependency of any known drug. Strong psychological dependency can occur with 1 hit of crack. Many people think that because crack is smoked, it is safer than other forms of cocaine use, and that's not true. Crack cocaine is one of the most addictive substances known today. The crack high is reached in 4 to 6 seconds. It can last about 15 minutes. Go back here for a second. Okay. Going on here, amphetamines and methamphetamines, or meth. And as you can see, there are different names for all of these. Other names for meth are ice, crank, crystal, and meth, of course. Signs and symptoms of use: hyperexcitability, restlessness, anxiety, and high anxiety, dilated pupils. Again, sweating is pretty common among use of these types of drugs. Rapid respiration, their eyes can't focus, and there's exaggerated reflexes and body tremors. So a lot of physical things that you could observe, and you may get experience observing with someone who's chronically using this stuff. Facts about these amphetamines and meth. People with a history of sustained low dose use quite often become dependent and believe they need to get the drug to get by. And the more they use it, the more they need to get that high. These users frequently keep taking amphetamines to avoid the down mood they experience when the high wears off. It's a vicious cycle. Opiates, narcotics, including heroin, morphine, codeine, and many synthetic drugs used to alleviate pain, depress body functions and reactions. In large doses, opiates can cause a strong euphoric feeling, again, giving you the feeling that you're on top of the world and you can do anything, when in reality, your reaction time is totally impacted. Common street names are horse, morpho, China, brown sugar, Harry, and dope. Signs and symptoms of use. Again, significant mood swings or changes in a person that were not normally there before. Impaired mental function and alertness, impaired vision, constricted pupils, and of course their coordination is going to suffer, very much so. Opiates, heroin, also called junk or smack, accounts for 90% of the narcotic abuse in the United States. It's still very much prevalent, and it's very pervasive throughout our communities, and it's something to really watch out for with people on the job. PCP, we've heard about, acts as both a depressant and a hallucinogen, and sometimes as a stimulant. Commonly called angel dust, rocket fuel, embalming fluid, and killer weed. Signs and symptoms of use: someone that's using these substances regularly. Impaired driving ability, big problem. Impaired coordination, thick slurred speech, a lot of confusion and agitation, highly agitated behavior, muscle rigidity, and again, profuse sweating. The abuse of PCP is less common today than in the past. 3 or 4 phases to PCP use: toxicity, which may be accompanied by convulsions, combativeness, catatonia, and even coma, visual delusions, and schizophrenia and depression. So real nasty stuff. A little bit of a quiz here, just to go over what we've been covering here. Again, just to recap here, everything we're talking about here today is safety related. It's safety first. There's probably a lot of regulatory questions around this, and we're aware of that. Basically, and also because of all the recent legislation going on, but this is about safety first. You as a supervisor making a call with someone who is clearly not 100% coming to work that morning, and them getting behind the wheel of an 18,000-pound truck, or handling a chainsaw, feeding a chipper, doing tree work, or anything else dangerous or classified as safety sensitive, your first and foremost responsibility is not the person in that situation where they could be a hazard to themselves, other staff, or members of the public. Question 1 here: what is the minimal breath alcohol concentration of a driver who has failed an alcohol test? .04. And it's a CDL, and CDLing length of time, everybody should know that number. Question 2, what is the acceptable amount of controlled substances or drugs that drivers may consume on the job? None. And again, this is prohibited. There's 3 signs a person would exhibit if he or she were abusing alcohol. Again, these questions can be available to you if you want to do your own training with your staff, and particularly after taking this course and becoming familiar with the information here, and given the recent legislation, probably not a bad time to do training with your staff about what's expected of them or not expected of them. So 3 signs a person would exhibit if he or she were abusing alcohol. Obviously, balance and coordination. Their gait's going to be off. They may, depending on how much they've had, maybe their speech is slightly slurred. Their eyes, you see a lot in the eyes. They're bloodshot, watery. Their pupils are constricted. Obviously, their reactions are slower. They seem sleepy, or they seem slow. Their condition seems slow. And obviously, the telltale odor of alcohol in the breath, which is obvious, but some people try to hide that. May try to hide that, but again, these are just examples of things you can write down when you're approaching this person about, going down for a test. Question 4. List 3 signs a person would exhibit if he or she were abusing drugs. Short attention span. Again, extremely overly excitable behavior. The reaction to things is very drastic. Unusually constricted or dilated pupils. Their memory is impaired. Again, their attention is not there. They seem to be seeing things, and extreme talkativeness. Again, are signs of drug abuse. Question 5, true or false? You may order a reasonable suspicion test if a coworker you trust tells you a driver has been drinking or using drugs in the job. Answer to that is false. Only trained supervisors who directly observed conduct can order a test. So this is why this training is important for you as supervisors, is that you have to personally observe the condition and the characteristics of the person. You can't rely on someone saying, or another employee coming to you and saying, he seems like he's under the influence, and you can send him down for a test. You got to personally observe this. Drivers are responsible for getting themselves to the testing facility as soon as you order the reasonable suspicion test. And that would be a no-no. Either you have to take that person down for a test or have them brought to the test by another trusted staff member. If that test is to be conducted off-site. So once you've determined this, you've sat the driver down and you've told them why they need to go for a test, and you've documented the observable behaviors and characteristics that were discussed here today. Then they should be brought down to the testing facility. And obviously, making them drive themselves is not going to work. Also, especially if they're under the influence, you don't want them driving themselves anyway. Within what specific amount of time must reasonable suspicion testing for alcohol take place? Again, within 2 hours of the observation, or as soon as possible. And after 2 hours, again, it has to be documented why it wasn't done within the 2-hour time frame. And an alcohol test cannot be conducted after 8 hours have elapsed, and a written record must be prepared stating why the test could not be administered. So for any number of reasons that doesn't happen, you really have to document that. If you don't know which substance the driver might be taking, should you order an alcohol test or a drug test or both? And the answer to that is yes, you can order both if you're unclear about what their under the influence condition is attributed to. So you can order both tests. Question 9, you may order a reasonable suspicion test for alcohol at any time. That's false. Again, you have to catch alcohol much more quickly than drugs in those time frames that were discussed. But they must be made immediately before, during an activity or a safety sensitive job, or just after that job is performed. According to regulations, a drug or alcohol violation is grounds for dismissal. Again, this is false, but employment consequences for testing positive are going to vary by your individual municipal policy. Again, this is up to the administration, your collective bargaining agreements, and what your regulations call for as far as discipline. And that's not something we get into. It's something the municipality will have to deal with directly under those, under these conditions. Question 11, true or false, health problems such as diabetes may mimic or resemble the symptoms of an alcohol or drug use. True. And again, it's something, these kinds of conditions that can look like and make a person look like they're not fit. Probably the employer should know about, especially if they're taking any prescription drugs, over-the-counter medication, or even prescribed medication. And we'll get to this question right here. Over-the-counter prescription medications are not subject to drug prohibitions. And that question is false because they are. Some antihistamines can produce side effects that interfere with driving ability. True. And again, that's why they have things that don't operate heavy equipment on the labels of some of these prescription medications, and they should be taken seriously. Drivers can take controlled substances with a letter of permission from their physician. True. The use of controlled substances pursuant to the instructions of a licensed medical practitioner who has advised the driver that the substance will not adversely affect the driver's ability to safely operate a vehicle. So you got to have that in writing from the doctor, basically, that this substance will not affect or adversely affect the driver's ability to operate and perform safely. So an employer may require a driver to inform the employer of any therapeutic drug use, and that should be part of your policy. If an employee is in this condition and has prescribed medication to that effect, the employer needs to know about it, and the employee should be told that. 15, should you order a reasonable suspicion test if a customer alerts you to the presence of alcohol on the driver's breath? Again, the answer is no. It has to be directly observed by you. So whether it's another staff member or a member of the public notifying you that they've observed this, you've got to see for yourself. Just to recap all of this, again, safety first. You as a supervisor, and the point of all of this is that you're making an observation of one of your staff members before they undertake the duties of the day, whether it's driving in a truck or snow plowing, doing road construction work, again, doing chainsaw work, operating heavy machinery, dangerous heavy equipment. You've got to make a call. And this training is very important so you can understand that. Now you may have prior knowledge of someone's abuse, whether it's drugs or alcohol, and you may be ready for that. But you have to make the call to get that person down for a test. Once that's determined and you discuss it with them, then you need to get them down for the test by escort and then see what the results are. And based on what those results are, then you're notified, the employer's notified, and whether it's a return to duty situation or they're taken off the job for a length of time, that may be the result of that. But this falls on the supervisor directly, this type of testing, and that's why it's very important to understand all the characteristics of this. If you have any questions, I know I haven't heard Steve or David anything on the chat. I'll be happy to answer them.
Many of the questions had to do with things that related to the individual employer's policies, such as does every employee that is not a CDL driver have to undergo testing like we do? And the answer, of course, is no. The audience today has chosen to be engaged in a safety-sensitive occupation in general. Not all employees in all the various job functions of a municipality have safety-sensitive positions. It may be that there's a drug policy that the employer has that would then cover those as well, but that's not really the same. You're kind of overseen by a federal standard. And for instance, even though New York State has legalized marijuana, you are in fact governed by a set of federal regulations in the profession that you've chosen. So you've got to play by those rules. And so.
Yeah, I think it's important that we stress, and that's a good point, David. You're not allowed to be impaired on the job, basically, bottom line, at any time you're operating and doing a safety-sensitive job. It's recreational use is just that. It's recreational use. It's not on the job use, and you do not have a right, and you cannot be allowed to work impaired on the job. That's the bottom line, and something to remember.
Also, if you want to find out more information about the legislation and the federal requirements, just Google FMCSA, and it'll bring you to their site, which is quite detailed.
Yes.
It's under the Federal Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. There's a lot of information there, and that applies to us here in New York as well.
Yeah, they may. You're right about that too, David. I mean, there may be other municipalities may have. They may have an overall drug use policy for all staff or employees, for example. Not necessarily just CDLs. So, but again, that's under the individual municipalities' policies.
I'm going to make everybody aware that this presentation is being recorded right now, and we're going to post it to the NYMER Online University. So it is available there. If you wish to email any of us, Roger's email is right there. Mine is the same. It's just dbloodgood@rightinsurance.com or skurlan@rightinsurance.com. We can forward to you the PowerPoint so that it can refresh you as you need to kind of review things. So,
yeah, again, hopefully, if you are having a training meeting or safety class with your staff in the near future, it's good stuff to go over. So employees are aware of your expectations, what's allowable and what's not allowable, and then again, stress the safety on the job aspect as much as you can, because that's what it's all about. Everybody going home at night uninjured, including members of the public and everything else. So any other questions, again, as David and Steve pointed out, please give us a call. And
thank you very much, Roger. Yep, thanks very much, Roger. And to all who joined us today, we really appreciate you taking the time to learn about this difficult topic. And through Roger's presentation, I'm sure you got an appreciation for how sensitively you have to approach it and document and proceed, because it's not just like, your number came up in a random test. This is by choice and by observation, and you need to document it. And so thank you all for joining us. And we'll be continuing various webinars. Keep an eye out for invitations. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.